"You're too poor to fight us, Vanessa," my cousin Chloe said. She threw a copy of the new will onto the polished mahogany table. She laughed, a cold, sharp sound that echoed in the quiet conference room. My Aunt Sarah nodded in agreement, adjusting her expensive diamond necklace. They both looked at me like I was a piece of trash they had found on the bottom of their shoes. I sat there in my simple civilian clothes. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I had spent years learning how to control my emotions, but this was testing my limits. Just then, the heavy wooden doors of the law office opened. A man in a tailored three-piece suit walked in. He was the senior partner of the firm, a man my aunt had spent weeks trying to get an appointment with. But he was not looking at my wealthy aunt or my cousin. He looked straight at me, his eyes widened in shock. He quickly corrected his posture, standing completely straight, and did something that made my aunt and cousin freeze in their seats. He gave me a look of deep, unquestioning respect and held out a thick black binder with a gold government seal. I looked at the binder, then back at my cousin. The room became so quiet you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. "Before I tell you what happened, tell me what time it is and where you're watching from." To understand how I ended up in that room, you have to understand my family. I grew up in a family that valued two things above all else: money and status. My Aunt Sarah married a very wealthy corporate executive. They lived in a massive house in a gated community in Lake Forest, Illinois. They drove luxury cars, went on expensive vacations, and made sure everyone knew how much money they had. My cousin Chloe was their only daughter. She was pampered, spoiled, and taught from a young age that she was better than everyone else. She went to an elite private school and had everything handed to her on a silver platter. I was different. My father passed away when I was young, and my mother worked hard just to keep a roof over our head. We did not have designer clothes or fancy cars, but we had something else. We had discipline, love, and a strong sense of duty. When I turned 18, I made a choice that shocked my family. I decided to join the United States military. My Aunt Sarah was horrified. I remember the family dinner where I shared the news. Chloe laughed into her glass of sparkling water. Aunt Sarah sighed loudly and shook her head. "Why would you throw your life away like that?" Aunt Sarah asked me. "The military is for people who cannot get into real colleges. It is for people who have no other options." "I want to serve my country, Aunt Sarah," I said quietly. "You want to wear a dusty uniform and live in a tent," Chloe sneered. "Have fun with that, Vanessa. While you are sleeping on the dirt, I will be enjoying my college dorm in Boston." I did not argue with them. I kept my mouth shut and focused on my goals. I knew that arguing with people who only valued money was a waste of time. Over the next 12 years, my life was very different from Chloe's. While she was attending parties and spending her parents' money, I was waking up before dawn. I was pushing my body to its absolute limits. I was learning how to lead people, how to solve complex problems, and how to stay calm when everything around me was falling apart. I went to college on a military scholarship. I earned my degree, and then I earned my commission as an officer. I worked in areas that required high intelligence, deep strategic planning, and absolute secrecy. I traveled the world, saw things most people only see in movies, and earned the respect of some of the most powerful people in the country, but I never talked about it. Whenever I came home for the holidays, my family treated me like a charity case. They saw my modest car and my simple clothes and assumed I was struggling. They did not understand how military pay worked, and they certainly did not understand my rank. To them, I was just a low-level government worker who made less money than their accountant. "Are you still doing that army thing?" Chloe asked me during a Thanksgiving dinner a few years ago. She was showing off her new designer handbag. "It must be so hard not being able to afford nice things." "I am doing well, Chloe, thank you," I replied with a polite smile. "Well, if you ever need a real job, my dad might be able to find you a position in his mailroom," Uncle Robert chimed in. Laughing, I simply nodded and took a sip of my water. I did not tell them about the teams of soldiers I commanded. I did not tell them about the commendations I had received. I did not tell them that the work I did kept their comfortable lives safe. They did not need to know, but there was one person in the family who understood me: my grandfather Arthur. Grandfather Arthur was a veteran himself. He had served in the military decades ago, and he was the only one who didn't care about my Aunt Sarah's wealth. He was a quiet, wise man who lived in a beautiful historic lake house in northern Michigan. The house had been in our family for generations. It sat on a massive piece of pristine land right on the water. It was worth millions of dollars, but to my grandfather it was a home. I spent every summer of my childhood at that lake house. My grandfather taught me how to fish, how to paint the wooden deck, and how to build a campfire. He was my hero. When I was deployed overseas, he was the only one who wrote to me every week. His letters kept me going during the hardest nights of my life. He always told me how proud he was of my service. "You have the heart of a leader, Vanessa," he wrote in one of his letters. "This family has lost its way. They think money is everything, but you know what real honor means. The lake house will be yours one day. You are the only one who will protect it." I did not care about the money. I only cared about the memories we shared there. Then, 6 months ago, my grandfather's health began to fail. I took emergency leave from my station to be with him. When I arrived at the hospital, I found my Aunt Sarah and Chloe already there. They were not sitting by his bedside holding his hand. They were in the hallway, talking on their phones, discussing what they were going to do with the lake house once he passed. "We can tear down that old wooden cabin and build a modern mansion," Chloe was saying. "Or we can sell the land to a developer. We could easily get $5 million for it." It sickened me. My grandfather was still breathing inside that room, and they were already dividing up his life. When I walked into his hospital room, my grandfather opened his eyes. He smiled weakly and reached for my hand. "Vanessa," he whispered, "you came?" "Of course I did, grandfather," I said, sitting beside him. We spoke for a long time. He was tired, and the medication made him drift in and out of sleep. But he was clear about one thing. He told me that he had taken care of everything. He told me that the lake house would be safe with me. 2 days later, my grandfather passed away. The funeral was a small affair, mostly because Aunt Sarah did not want to spend the money on a large gathering. She and Chloe wore expensive black designer outfits, but they did not shed a single tear. They spent the entire service looking at their phones. After the service, we gathered at my grandfather's house to pack up his things. Or rather, I went to pack up his things. Aunt Sarah and Chloe went to search for anything of value. I was in my grandfather's study, carefully wrapping his old books and military photos. When Aunt Sarah walked in, she was holding a folder. "You can stop packing, Vanessa," she said, her voice cold. "We have hired professional movers to clear the place out. We are putting the house on the market next week." I stopped what I was doing and looked at her. "What do you mean? Grandfather always said the house was staying in the family. He promised it to me." Aunt Sarah smiled, a smug, triumphant look on her face. "Your grandfather was old and confused. Vanessa, he signed a new will 3 weeks ago. Everything goes to me and Chloe." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. 3 weeks ago, my grandfather was in the hospital, heavily medicated and barely conscious. He could not have made a decision like that. "That is impossible," I said, keeping my voice level. "He would never do that." "Well, the paperwork says otherwise," Chloe said, stepping into the room behind her mother. "It is signed and notarized, so you can take your little box of cheap metals and get out of our house." I looked at my aunt and my cousin. I saw the greed in their eyes. I realized then that they had taken advantage of a dying, medicated old man to steal his legacy. But I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply picked up the small wooden box of my grandfather's medals, the only thing they allowed me to take, and walked out of the house. I went back to my temporary apartment and opened the wooden box. I touched the tarnished metal of my grandfather's medals, feeling a deep sense of sadness and betrayal. But as I lifted the velvet lining of the box to clean it, my finger caught on something hard. There was a false bottom in the box. I carefully lifted the wooden piece. Hidden underneath was a small, sealed envelope with an official government stamp that I recognized instantly. It was a stamp used only by high-level military and government trustees. Inside the envelope was a key and a handwritten note from my grandfather, dated just 1 week before he went into the hospital. My heart began to beat faster as I read the words. Before I could even finish reading the note, my phone on the desk began to buzz. It was an unknown, highly secured military number. I answered it. "Ma'am," a formal voice on the other end said, "we have just received a notification regarding your grandfather's estate. You need to look at your secure email immediately." I kept the phone to my ear and opened my laptop. I logged into my secure government portal. An email was waiting for me. As I read the document on my screen, my hands began to tremble. It was not just a message about my grandfather. It was an official alert that changed everything I thought I knew about my family, my grandfather's past, and the true nature of his wealth. The email on my secure screen was from the Office of the Judge Advocate General, the legal branch of the military. The caller on the phone was Colonel Thomas, a senior military lawyer who had been a friend of my grandfather. He told me that my grandfather's estate was not just a simple lake house. "Your grandfather's true estate has a federal hold on it, Vanessa," Colonel Thomas said. "No one can touch it without your specific signature as the designated trustee. Your aunt's lawyers have been trying to bypass the system, but they have no idea what they are dealing with." I looked at the handwritten note from my grandfather. It read, "Vanessa, they will try to take everything. They do not know what I really left behind. Keep this key safe. Do not let them sell the land." "I understand, Colonel," I said into the phone. "What is our next step?" "For now, do nothing," Colonel Thomas replied. "Let them think they have won. We need to gather the evidence of what they did. If they forged that will, they have committed a federal crime." I hung up the phone. I took a deep breath. In the military, we are taught to wait for the right moment to strike. Patience is a weapon. As I sat in the quiet room, my mind drifted back to our family history. This was not the first time my Aunt Sarah and Uncle Robert had tried to push us aside. They had been doing it for as long as I could remember. When I was 10 years old, my mother became very sick. She could not work and we could not pay our rent. My mother, swallowing her pride, asked Aunt Sarah for a small loan to help us get through the month. Aunt Sarah had laughed. I remember sitting on the stairs, listening to her cold voice on the phone. "If you had married a successful man like Robert, you wouldn't have this problem," Aunt Sarah had said. "I am not throwing my husband's hard-earned money away on your poor choices. It was my grandfather Arthur who stepped in. He secretly paid our rent for 6 months and made sure we had groceries." But when Aunt Sarah found out, she threw a massive tantrum. She accused my grandfather of wasting her future inheritance on us. Looking back, that was my first warning of how greedy they truly were. They also made sure I knew my place. When I graduated from high school, there was no celebration. My family did not even attend my graduation ceremony. But when Chloe graduated from her expensive private high school, my aunt and uncle threw a party that cost $50,000. They rented a country club and invited hundreds of guests. At that party, Uncle Robert stood up to give a toast. He talked about how Chloe was destined for greatness because of her family's wealth and connections. Then he spotted me sitting in the corner, wearing a simple dress I had bought on sale. "And here is Vanessa," Uncle Robert said into the microphone, chuckling. "She is off to join the military next month. Let's hope she learns how to fold shirts properly." The guests laughed. I felt a hot sting of embarrassment, but I kept my face completely blank. I did not let them see my pain. I didn't know it then, but 12 years later, Uncle Robert's own company would be begging the military for a major government contract. And they had no idea that I would be the officer reviewing their application. My aunt and cousin had no idea what my actual job in the military was. They thought I was a clerk or a basic soldier who stood guard at a gate. In reality, I was a major in military intelligence. My specialty was financial forensics. My job was to track illegal money flowing across borders and shut down corrupt organizations. I knew exactly how to find hidden assets, and I knew how to spot a fake document from a mile away. I decided to run a quiet check on the notary public who had stamped my grandfather's new will. I called a friend of mine, a digital forensics specialist in the military. I asked him to look into the name on the document. "Vanessa, this notary is a guy named Arthur Vance," my friend told me over a secure line. "He is on the payroll of a subsidiary company owned by your Uncle Robert. He has a history of questionable legal filings." I smiled. I should have guessed. My Uncle Robert had used his business connections to forge a will while my grandfather was too sick in the hospital to defend himself. But that wasn't the worst part. The next morning, I received a text message from Chloe. It was a photo of my grandfather's old wooden rowboat. It was the boat he and I had restored together by hand when I was 12 years old. We had spent weeks sanding the wood and painting it a bright, clean blue. In the photo, the rowboat was sitting in a giant pile of trash near the main road. "We are clearing out the garage today," Chloe's text read. "This old junk is taking up space. If you want it, come get it before the garbage truck arrives at noon. Otherwise, it's going to the dump." A wave of anger rushed through me. That boat was a piece of my childhood. It was a symbol of my grandfather's love. I drove to the lake house immediately. When I arrived, Chloe was standing in the driveway, holding a cup of expensive coffee. Two workers in orange vests were throwing my grandfather's old tools and handmade wooden chairs into a giant dumpster. "Stop," I said, walking up to them. My voice was calm, but it had the sharp authority of an officer. The workers immediately stopped and looked at me. There was something in my posture that made them hesitate. Chloe laughed, taking a sip of her coffee. "Don't listen to her, keep throwing it away. I am the one paying your wages, not her." She looked at me with a smirk. "What are you going to do, Vanessa? Call the army? You don't own this place anymore. You have no power here." I looked at the dumpster. I looked at the beautiful rowboat sitting by the trash pile. I knew I could not stop them by force. Not yet. In the military, we do not launch an attack until all our assets are in place. "Very well, Chloe," I said quietly. "Enjoy your day." I turned around, got back into my car, and drove away. But I was not giving up. I was preparing. I pulled over to the side of the road and made a major decision. I took out my secure phone and dialed Colonel Thomas. "Colonel," I said, my voice steady, "it is time. Activate the federal review of the trust, and I want a full audit on my Uncle Robert's company." "Are you sure, Major?" Colonel Thomas asked. "Once we start this process, there is no going back. Your family will face severe consequences." "I am sure," I replied. "They think they are too rich to lose. Let us show them what happens when you fight the United States government." I hung up the phone that evening. I was sitting in my small apartment looking at the old key my grandfather had left me. I was trying to figure out what locker or security box it opened. Suddenly, there was a loud knock on my door. It was late. No one knew I was staying at this location. I walked to the door, keeping my body low and my hand near my side, a habit from my years of active service. I opened the door. Standing on my porch was a young man in a dark suit, holding a sealed black envelope. He looked incredibly nervous, his eyes darting around the quiet street. "Are you Major Vanessa Carter?" he asked, his voice shaking slightly. "I am," I replied. He handed me the envelope. "This was just intercepted from your aunt's legal team. You need to read this immediately." I opened the envelope and read the first page. My jaw tightened as I processed the words. What they were planning to do next was far worse than anything I could have imagined. The document inside the black envelope made my blood run cold. It was an emergency petition filed by my Aunt Sarah's lawyers. They were asking a local judge to grant them immediate permission to demolish my grandfather's lake house. They claimed the historic home was unstable and a safety hazard. But I knew the truth. The house was perfectly strong. They wanted to tear it down immediately so I would have nothing left to fight for. If the house was gone, the developer could buy the empty land and start building their luxury resort. My aunt and uncle would get their multi-million-dollar payout, and my grandfather's legacy would be erased forever. According to the document, the demolition crew was scheduled to arrive on Monday morning at 8 o'clock. I looked at the calendar. It was Friday night. I had less than 3 days to stop them. I should have noticed their desperation sooner, I muttered to myself, but I did not panic. In my line of work, panic is a luxury we cannot afford. When a mission goes wrong, you do not cry. You adapt and you execute a new plan. I sat down at my desk and opened my secure military laptop. It was time to start putting our assets in place. First, I made a call to a colleague in Washington, D.C. His name was Marcus, and he was one of the top financial investigators for the Department of Defense. "Marcus, I need a favor," I said when he answered. "I need a complete financial profile on a company called Apex Logistics. It is owned by my uncle, Robert Carter." "Give me 10 minutes, Vanessa," Marcus replied. While I waited, I began reviewing the old files my grandfather had left in the secret compartment of his wooden box. Among the papers was a document from 1974. It was signed by a high-ranking government official. It stated that the lake house and the surrounding land were classified as a protected historical site under a special military veteran act. My grandfather had worked on a highly classified defense project during his service. The government had granted his property special federal protections that local courts could not touch. But my grandfather had kept this a secret from his own daughter. He knew Sarah's greed would eventually lead her to try and sell it. He wanted to make sure the property was only passed down to someone who would protect it. My phone buzzed. It was Marcus. "Vanessa, I have the files," Marcus said. His voice sounded serious. Your Uncle Robert is in deep trouble. His company is on the verge of bankruptcy. He has been bidding on a massive military logistics contract to save his business. What kind of contract? I asked. A $50 million defense contract, Marcus said. But here is the crazy part. To prove his company has the financial backing to handle the project, he listed your grandfather's lake house and the trust assets as his personal collateral. I stared at the screen. A cold smile spread across my face. He listed property he does not own as collateral for a federal contract? I asked to clarify. Exactly, Marcus said. If the military finds out he lied on his application, it is a federal crime. He could go to prison for a very long time. At the time, I didn't think much of his arrogance, I thought to myself. But this was a fatal mistake. Uncle Robert had tried to use his wealth and status to bully me, but in his rush to secure the contract, he had committed major financial fraud. I thanked Marcus and hung up. I spent the rest of the weekend handling paperwork. I filled out federal injunction forms. I contacted the military legal department. I authorized a background check on the corrupt notary public, Arthur Vance. I worked quietly. I did not call my aunt. I did not send angry text messages to Chloe. I wanted them to think they were completely safe. On Sunday morning, Chloe sent me another text. It was a photo of her and Aunt Sarah standing in front of the lake house holding champagne glasses. Behind them, a giant yellow bulldozer was parked in the driveway. Last toast to this old dump, Chloe wrote. Tomorrow morning it becomes history. Hope you are enjoying your cheap military apartment, Vanessa. I did not reply. I closed my laptop and packed my bags. It was time to drive to Michigan. That evening, the sun began to set over the lake. The water was calm and beautiful, reflecting the orange and purple colors of the sky. I parked my old sedan a block away from the property and walked quietly through the trees. I wanted to see what was happening. The lake house was brightly lit. My Aunt Sarah, Uncle Robert, and Chloe were hosting a private dinner on the wooden deck. They were celebrating with the wealthy developer who wanted to buy the land. I could hear their laughter echoing across the water. They were talking about the millions of dollars they were going to make. They had no idea that their entire world was about to collapse. Suddenly, the sound of their laughter was cut short. A loud, deep rumbling sound came from the long dirt driveway. Headlights cut through the darkness, casting long shadows across the lawn. It was not the bulldozer crew. It was a line of 3 large, black government SUVs. The vehicles drove slowly up to the house and parked in a semicircle, blocking my uncle's luxury car. The doors of the SUVs opened simultaneously. Several men in dark suits stepped out, followed by a local sheriff. But it was the man who stepped out of the lead vehicle that made my aunt and uncle freeze in terror. He was wearing a formal military uniform with shiny stars on his shoulders. I watched from the shadows as the man marched toward the deck, holding a folder with a bright red federal stamp. My Aunt Sarah stepped forward, her face turning pale. "Who are you? What is the meaning of this?" The officer did not look at her. He looked past her, searching the darkness. "I am looking for Major Vanessa Carter," he said in a booming voice. My aunt and cousin gasped. They looked at each other, completely confused. "Vanessa," Chloe stammered. "She doesn't live here, she is just a poor soldier." "Why are you looking for her?" The officer turned his gaze to my Uncle Robert. "Robert Carter, you are under federal investigation." I stepped out of the shadows of the pine trees. I was wearing my official military service dress uniform. The dark blue fabric was pressed perfectly. The brass buttons shone brightly in the headlights of the government vehicles. On my chest were rows of colorful ribbons and medals, representing years of hard work, sacrifice, and danger. Chloe's champagne glass slipped from her fingers. It shattered on the wooden deck, spilling liquid across the polished planks. "Vanessa," she whispered, her voice trembling. What are you wearing?" "This is my uniform, Chloe," I said, walking slowly toward the deck. My boots made a firm, steady sound against the ground. "The one you said was only for people who could not succeed in the real world." General Collins stepped forward. He stood at attention and gave me a crisp, professional salute. "Major Carter," he said, "the federal agents are in position. We are ready to proceed." I returned the salute. "Thank you, General." My Aunt Sarah looked like she had seen a ghost. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Major, you are a major since when?" "For 3 years, Aunt Sarah," I said calmly. I just did not feel the need to brag about it. "But you drive an old car," Chloe stammered, looking at my uniform in absolute horror. You live in a tiny apartment. You're supposed to be poor. I value service, not showing off, I replied. The local sheriff stepped onto the deck, accompanied by 2 federal agents from the Defense Criminal Investigative Service. Robert Carter, the sheriff said, looking at my uncle. We have a warrant for your arrest. Arrest? Uncle Robert gasped, stepping back. On what grounds? This is a civil dispute over a family will. You have no right to interfere. This is no longer a civil dispute, Robert, I said. 2 hours ago, federal agents arrested Arthur Vance, the notary public who signed my grandfather's new will. Aunt Sarah's face turned completely white. She gripped the railing of the deck to keep from falling. Mr. Vance confessed to everything, the sheriff continued. He admitted that you and your wife, Sarah, paid him $10,000 to forge Arthur Carter's signature on a fake will while he was heavily medicated in the hospital. No, that is a lie, Aunt Sarah shrieked, her voice cracking with panic. He is making that up. Vanessa is behind this. She is trying to steal our house. Quiet, Sarah, Uncle Robert hissed, his hands shaking violently. The federal agent stepped forward, opening a thick leather folder. But that is not your only problem. Mr. Carter, you took that forged will and used it to claim ownership of this lake house. Then you listed this property as collateral to secure a $50 million defense contract for your company, Apex Logistics. I was going to pay it back, Uncle Robert stammered. You lied on a federal defense application, the agent said. That is high-level wire fraud, bank fraud, and government contract fraud. Because this property was tied to a protected federal military trust, your actions fall under federal jurisdiction. The developer, Mr. Henderson, who had been sitting at the table, stood up. He looked furious. His face was bright red. What is the meaning of this, Robert? Mr. Henderson roared. You told me you own this land free and clear. I wire transferred a $1 million deposit to your business account on Friday morning. I had to use it, Uncle Robert whispered, his voice cracking. My company was going under. I had to pay off our creditors. You scammed me, Mr. Henderson yelled. I want my $1 million back right now. There is no money left, Mr. Henderson, I said quietly. Aunt Sarah fell to her knees on the deck, sobbing hysterically. Chloe stood frozen, looking at her mother, then at her father, and finally at me. This can't be happening, Chloe cried. Vanessa, please make them stop. We are family. Tell your military friends to let us go. You didn't care about family when you threw my grandfather's memories in the trash, Chloe, I said. Just then, another set of headlights sped up the long driveway. A luxury silver sedan screeched to a halt behind the military vehicles. A man in a sharp business suit got out. It was Mr. Harrison, the senior president of the private bank that managed my aunt and uncle's family trust fund, the very fund that paid for their mansion, their cars, and Chloe's expensive lifestyle. Mr. Harrison looked terrified. He ran up the steps of the deck, holding a stack of papers. Sarah, Robert, he gasped, catching his breath. Thank goodness I found you. Something terrible has happened. What is it, Harrison? Uncle Robert asked, his voice barely a whisper as the sheriff reached for his handcuffs. The federal government has just issued a complete freeze on all your personal bank accounts, your business accounts, and the family trust fund, Mr. Harrison said. What? Chloe shrieked, stepping forward. No, you can't touch the trust fund. That is my money. I need it. Mr. Harrison looked at Chloe with pity, then he turned his gaze to me. He bowed his head slightly in respect and handed me the document he was holding. I am sorry, Miss Carter, the banker said to Chloe, but the trust fund was never actually yours. He looked at me. Major Carter, the truth has finally been unlocked. Mr. Harrison, the bank president, cleared his throat and looked at the document in his hands. 20 years ago, Arthur Carter established this trust, Mr. Harrison explained, his voice echoing in the quiet night. Your grandfather was the sole funding source of the entire family fortune. Sarah, you and Robert did not build your wealth. You lived off of his generosity. Aunt Sarah looked up from the deck, her eyes wide with shock. But it was a family trust. We had a right to it. No, Mr. Harrison said, shaking his head. The trust had a very specific clause. Your grandfather kept the right to change the sole beneficiary at any time, and he had a safety trigger. He looked at me with deep respect. In the event of his death, or in the event of any unauthorized attempt to alter his estate, the entire trust fund, all the properties, the bank account, and the investments would immediately transfer to a single designated successor. Mr. Harrison pointed to the document. That successor is Major Vanessa Carter. The trust is now completely hers. She has sole control over every single asset. Chloe let out a loud, desperate shriek. No, that is not fair. She is just a soldier. She doesn't know anything about money. That is my inheritance. Actually, Chloe, I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. As a financial forensics officer, I know exactly how to manage assets, and my first decision is to cut off all funding to you and your parents. Aunt Sarah began to weep louder, burying her face in her hands. The mansion in Lake Forest, the luxury cars, your expensive bank accounts, they are all owned by the trust, Mr. Harrison told them. Major Carter has the legal right to seize them all to pay back the debts your husband created. Uncle Robert stood in silence. The local sheriff stepped forward and pulled his arms behind his back. The metal handcuffs clicked into place. Robert Carter, you are under arrest for federal fraud, the sheriff said. They led my uncle down the steps of the deck. He looked defeated, his head hanging low. The man who had laughed at me for joining the military was now being put into the back of a police cruiser. Mr. Henderson, the wealthy developer, stepped up to me. He took off his hat, looking embarrassed. Major Carter, I want to apologize, Mr. Henderson said. I had no idea your uncle was lying to me. I had no idea this property belonged to a federal military trust. I am deeply sorry for any disrespect. Thank you, Mr. Henderson, I replied. I appreciate your apology. My legal team will work with you to ensure your $1 million deposit is recovered from my uncle's personal business assets. And the land? He asked quietly. Will you still sell it? No, I said, looking out at the beautiful lake. This land will never be sold. It will remain a protected nature reserve just as my grandfather wanted. I plan to use the trust to turn this house into a retreat for retired veterans. Mr. Henderson nodded, a look of genuine respect on his face. That is a noble thing to do, Major. Your grandfather would be very proud. He walked away, leaving only my aunt, my cousin, and the federal agents on the deck. Aunt Sarah crawled toward me, her expensive dress ruined by the dirt. She reached out to grab my boots. Vanessa, please, she begged, tears streaming down her face. We are sorry, we were wrong about you. We didn't know how important you were. Please do not take our home. We have nowhere else to go. Chloe stood behind her, crying quietly. The arrogant attitude she had carried for years was completely gone. She looked small, frightened, and defeated. Vanessa, we are family, Chloe whispered. You can't do this to us. I looked down at them. I did not feel angry anymore. I only felt a deep sense of pity. You did not care about family when my mother was sick and needed help, I said. You did not care about family when you threw my grandfather's tools and our childhood rowboat into the trash. You only care about family now because you have lost your money. They had no answer. They could only look at the ground in shame. I will not let you go hungry, I told them. The trust will provide a modest apartment for you, Aunt Sarah, but the luxury life is over. You will have to find real jobs and you will have to pay back the damages you caused. I turned to the federal agents. Please assist them in leaving the property. Yes, Major, the agent replied. I turned away and walked into my grandfather's house. The rooms were quiet and filled with shadows. I walked into his old study and looked at the empty desk. I opened the small wooden box I had carried with me. Inside were his military medals. I carefully took them out and placed them on the desk. Beside them, I placed my own major's insignia. I looked out the window. The black government SUVs were driving away, their red and blue lights fading into the dark Michigan night. The lake was quiet once again. My grandfather had taught me that true strength does not come from boasting, showing off, or bullying others. It does not come from the brand of your car or the size of your bank account. True strength comes from discipline. It comes from patience. It comes from having the integrity to do the right thing, even when no one is watching. My family had thought I was weak because I chose a life of quiet service. They thought they were too rich to lose and they thought I was too poor to fight. But they did not understand that some things are worth more than money. Honor, legacy, and duty cannot be bought. I pulled up a chair and sat down at my grandfather's desk. For the first time in a very long time, I felt completely at peace. The lake house was safe, my grandfather's legacy was protected, and I was ready for whatever mission came next.